Hello and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Here's what we're looking at. Chicago workers could see a bump in pay if the city does away with its tipped minimum wage. What that could mean for employees, restaurants, and patrons.
Google is in court on charges it uses illegal payoffs to maintain its near monopoly of the search engine market. And a local artist teaches traditional Ukrainian glass painting to raise awareness of the war in her home country. And now to some of today's top stories. President Joe Biden could be facing impeachment now that Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has directed a committee to formally open an impeachment inquiry into the Biden family finances.
Here's what we know so far. Through our investigations, we have found that President Biden did lie to the American people about his own knowledge of his family's foreign business dealings.
The inquiry is a step toward impeachment. McCarthy argues the House Oversight Committee has so far found a, quote, culture of corruption around the Biden family as Republicans investigate the business dealings of the president's son, Hunter Biden, from the time before the president was elected. The White House has called the move extreme politics at its worst.
Attorneys for Jussie Smollett are arguing his convictions for disorderly conduct and making false police statements should be thrown out. An Illinois appeals court heard oral arguments in the case today. Smollett's attorneys argue the case violates his Fifth Amendment right against double jeopardy, but a special prosecutor disagrees with that premise. Smollett was convicted of faking a hate crime when he claimed to be the victim of a racist and homophobic attack near his Streeterville residence.
Illinois' ban on book bans was front and center at a U.S. Senate hearing chaired by Illinois Senator Dick Durbin. At the hearing, Secretary of State Alexi Janulius testified about Illinois legislation that prevents state grant funding for libraries that don't adhere to the American Library Association's Bill of Rights or libraries that don't issue a statement prohibiting the practice of banning books or resources.
You see, our libraries have become targets by a movement that disingenuously claims to pursue freedom, but is instead promoting authoritarianism. Authoritarian regimes ban books, not democracies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The Senate Judiciary Committee says in 2022, activists submitted more than 1,000 requests to ban books at public schools and libraries, the highest number in over 20 years. Today's hearing examined the history of book bans, recent efforts to limit access to certain books, and the limitations book bans impose.
A huge crowd attended the Illinois State Fair last month. In fact, the governor says attendance set an all-time record. That's a lot of people witnessing the world-famous butter cow seen here. Governor J.B. Pritzker announces more than 700,000 people attended the 11-day event. Pritzker touted $80 million in state infrastructure money spent recently to upgrade the state fairgrounds.
Coming up in the program, Google is at the center of a landmark trial. What you should know about the case.
But first, will Chicago do away with a tipped minimum wage? We explore a proposed ordinance that would do just that right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Restaurant workers in Chicago who are tipped are getting closer to a raise if some older people have their way. Currently, tipped workers like restaurant servers and bartenders make a sub-minimum wage of $9.48. Chicago's current minimum wage is $15.80. But when an employee's hourly wage plus tips don't add up to $15.80, their employers have to make up the difference. The ordinance being considered now would phase out the city's lower wage for tipped workers over a 2-year period, and it has the backing of Mayor Brandon Johnson. Here to talk about the proposal are Alderwoman Jessie Fuentes, who is the lead sponsor of the ordinance and represents the 26th Ward. Nataki Rhodes, the national lead network organizer for the organization One Fair Wage, which is pushing for the change. Amarit Dulia Peibel, managing partner at Let Us Entertain You Restaurants, and Mario Ponce, the owner of Taquito brand restaurants. Everyone, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Alderwoman Fuentes, let's start with you, please. Why is City Council considering this? Now with restaurants, some are still struggling to come back from the pandemic.
Absolutely. We have to understand that the sub minimum wage is rooted in slavery, right? It's where it started here in the city of Chicago. We know that women, particularly women of color, suffer from discrimination and sexual harassment on the job and are less likely to get the tips that are going to get them to the minimum wage. I mean, the Obama administration found that 85% of our restaurants that are required to get folks to the minimum wage are in violation of that policy. We have something here that can work. It's been implemented in 7 other states. Let's get folks to the minimum wage, get them with tips on tops. It's better for the economy, it's better for families, and we'll get folks, particularly women of color, out of poverty.
Mario Ponce, what would paying that $15.80 minimum wage mean for your 3 restaurants? And do you already have to make up the difference if folks aren't receiving enough through tips?
Yeah, good questions. We seldom have to pay the difference between $9.48 versus $15.80, primarily because the staff make generally more than that on a consistent basis. The challenge we have here is, to answer your question is, absolutely, our staff would make less money if, in fact, we were to incorporate this new ordinance. We believe that we will have to raise prices as a result of this, and I think it's going to be a real tragedy for us restaurateurs, independent restaurateurs specifically, if this ordinance passes. One thing that wasn't mentioned was the fact that the minimum wage has been going up $1 a year per hour per year for the last 6 or 7 years. That's affected us, of course. It's affected profitability, it's affected our business. This is just something that we cannot tolerate.
Nataki Rhodes, what have been the results in other big cities that have eliminated the sub-minimum wage?
So the sub-minimum wage, it has been a great result. Tips has went up. Business is still booming in California, Alaska, Montana, Oregon. Business is still booming. And it stops saying it's going to be a tragedy to Chicago. You own 3 restaurants, and if your workers receive $9.48 plus getting their tips, that's not a living wage. Yep. If they receive $15 an hour with tips on top, that is a living wage. And also, folks are already paying $15 an hour. It's called the Great Resignation. Folks left because of low wages. They're not coming back because of low wages, and this has been a great statistic.
I want to come back to whether or not restaurants would still, how much workers might still earn if tips were earned on top of that $15.80 minimum wage. But I want to get Amarie Dulia-Pavel in here as well. You're managing partner at Let Us Entertain You, which has dozens of restaurants, more than the 3 that Mario Ponce here has. So we've got a little bit of both. How would those changes impact your businesses and your employees?
Well, I want to be clear that I am a managing partner at Let Us Entertain You. It's a huge restaurant group, but I also represent my parents that operate a single independent Thai restaurant in downtown Chicago. I grew up in those restaurants, and I worked alongside a lot of our great employees. And this proposed ordinance, affects restaurants of every scale and everyone in our business. And I just want to clear up, I think, a fundamental mischaracterization of the tip credit. No one in our restaurants makes less than $15.80 per hour. No one. And if there are bad actors out there that are paying their employees less than the law minimum wage of $15.80, let's go after those bad actors. Let's find those bad actors. Let's make it easier to call them out. But the median, according to the National Restaurant Association, the median hourly wage for a server in Illinois was $28.40. That's 80% higher than the minimum wage in Chicago. So I just want to be clear that this is going to affect businesses at every scale.
So if a worker is making $28 right now, they're not going back down to $9.48 an hour. You will continue to pay that worker the $28 an hour. We're talking about workers
that $28 an hour comes out after tips.
That is
an hourly rate.
So you're saying that your workers are making $9.48 an hour.
Our servers, after their tip credit wage and gratuities, are making, in the state of Illinois, over $28 an hour, and at Let Us Entertain You, even higher hourly wages than that. We're really proud of that. So I recognize the problem we're trying to solve. I just think that the ordinance being proposed is not addressing it in the right way.
Alderwoman Fuentes, have you spoken to or negotiated with the Illinois Restaurant Association on this yet?
Yeah, we've been in conversations with Sam Toya, and we have invited the Illinois Restaurant Association and Let Us Entertain You back to the table. Look, negotiations are not done here. right? The proposal that we have, there is room to increase the scale up of the years. And I just want to go back and say, look, folks are not going to make less with this ordinance. We're asking for the increase to the minimum wage with tips on top. We have not said that there are no tips on top. And so if we're saying that our folks are making good tips, then what we are asking for is to allow folks to truly be able to live in the city of Chicago. Look, the average one-bedroom apartment in some of the communities in my ward are $1,800 a month. What we are saying is that women with families deserve to work in the hospitality industry, provide for their families, and not have to work 2 to 3 jobs to do so.
Mario Ponce, would that help if it were to be phased in over a number of years, be it 2, be it 5?
Maybe. Here's the challenge here. We've gone from 948 to 1580 in lightning speed, right? 2, 3, 4, 5 years. That's pretty significant. That's over a 60% increase. This is the problem that operators can't absorb. And if there's another way of doing this, certainly, I welcome that. But it's a significant problem. Additionally, we've been challenged with the pandemic, as you know. We're dealing with inflation. We're dealing with crime.
Well, workers
we're
are
dealing with
dealing
property
with that too,
taxes.
as well.
And the point is, well, we're the employer
with
that takes that guest and takes that employee
rates.
rather seriously. They're family to us.
Yeah.
So we're here to protect them. Absolutely. Which is why we said earlier, we are in fact meeting that minimum wage and then some. The best thing to do, quite frankly, is just to abolish the ordinance, let it go away, and let's move forward.
Every time
it's a win-win
time
situation
to raise the minimum wage, it's always, you always say that you're going to close the restaurant. Workers are not going to make it. Workers, this is not the first time. This is the second administration that has ignored and always leave tip workers out. I am a tip worker myself. I was making $4.95 here in Chicago. I have struggled. I have been in Chicago 51 years of my life, and I have struggled when I decided to be a tip worker and a worker. And we should work with dignity. We shouldn't just
Ms.
be
Rhodes,
getting
let me
paid
just
low
say
wages.
one thing, which is that we all agree here that we want our employees to make a fair wage.
We need to make a fair wage.
What I've seen throughout my career, and I think what we all know at this table.
I've been in it 15 years.
And I think everyone at this table agrees that what is best for our guests and what is best for our employees.
Guests would want to know that you can pay
is also what's best for our businesses.
Guests would
and
want to
for our
know
city.
that you can pay
And
your workers without living in poverty. That's what guests want to know.
Well, I want to get,
As
because
I
we've
lived
only
in
got,
Chicago.
we've got about a minute left. Marie, quickly, would tipping live on if this raise were to go into effect?
Well,
and
let's talk
what
about
might
the
fit?
places. Let's talk about the places where ordinance like this have passed, right? We talked about 7 cities and states across the country. On the West Coast, there's California, Oregon, Washington, and Washington, D.C.
And Minnesota.
Minnesota as well. We've seen in those places menu prices increase dramatically, right? We see in those places hours being cut. People with less seniority and people with less experience, their jobs are being eliminated. We see technology and automation replacing humans. So we don't want that for Chicago.
Automatics is not going to replace when someone is sitting down to eat at Applebee's or Original House of
It's already happening
Pancakes.
at McDonald's.
Original
Yeah, we
House
see it
of
already.
Pancakes is
It's
not
already
going to get
happening
a
at grocery
rollback.
stores and banks.
Gibson's is not going to do that.
And I want to
That's
answer,
not true.
If
That's
you're driving
so
down the
not
street,
true.
I want you to look at all the stores that are closed. Okay,
It's
that are
not
for
due
rent.
to because they raise
Businesses
wages.
are closing.
When
It's
pandemic
becoming very
hit,
expensive
you guys
to do business in
never
the city of
took
Chicago.
any money and put it into the workers. You guys
So I want to
never put money into the
Nataki,
workers'
thank you so much, because
wages.
we are actually out of time. Alderwoman Fuentes, you've got 25 co-sponsors and the backing of the mayor. Obviously, we'll be keeping an eye on City Council to see what happens going forward. But I have to thank my guests, Alderwoman Jessie Fuentes, Nataki Rhodes, Marie Dulia-Pavel, and Mario Ponce. Thank you both. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Up next, Google is in court, and we have the latest. Stay with us.
Where have we been? Where are we at? Where are we going?
Essentially to be able to help anyone and everyone in the community, whether that's through academic support, social emotional learning, or just providing a safe space for youth to be able to be there.
This is the fabric of the neighborhood. You need to take care of the neighborhood. It's an ecosystem.
She is an artist, an animal lover, a teacher, and a native of Ukraine. A Chicago resident for 30-plus years, Elena Diadenko uses her talents to teach a traditional form of folk art and raise awareness of the ongoing war in the country where she was born. Producer Mark Vitale recently brought us this story, and here's another look.
And I can't think of a better moment or a better place to name something in his honor than naming something in his honor that is committed to self-determination, and that's affordable housing. Yes.
We first met Elena Diadenko at the Ukrainian National Museum in March 2022. She was selling her art to benefit the Red Cross in Ukraine, ultimately raising nearly $50,000. Many works were painted on glass. Now the artist, a Golden Apple Award-winning teacher, is giving lessons on how to make this traditional form of folk art that first flourished in the 16th century.
It is cultural tradition. Basically, self-taught artists started to paint on glass in reverse, and the themes were mostly from the Bible. So you can see a lot of Virgin Marys, a lot of icons and saints. A few hundred years later, a lot of self-taught artists who live in different villages started to paint on glass in reverse. But their themes were primarily village themes. So they would draw peasants, they would draw animals. It was really primitive style of painting. It looked really nice, very authentic, very bright, and always with black outline.
Diadenko still raises money for the war effort, and she has a new cause. Her friend, a parish priest near Kyiv, has been caring for the many animals displaced by the Russian invasion.
So he started picking them up from eastern regions and start feeding them, start giving them medical treatments. I asked him, how many cats and dogs did you save? I say 100, 200, over 200. He told me after 200 we stopped counting.
His efforts have actually saved many more animals. To benefit the animal shelter, she now leads classes on how to make a painting using glass as a canvas.
My first class had about 23 people, and some of them had no idea how to paint. So I told them not to worry. I have a lot of sketches of my own that I gave them. And if you have to write anything that you wish to write, you have to write backwards, in reverse. You paint on one side and the image is on the opposite side of the glass. I'm an artist and I'm an educator. I'm doing this because I just cannot not do it. I have to do it to stay sane. It helps me because I feel like, what's the point to cry? You have to put yourself together and think what you can do to help. So like a soldier, that's how I see it.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
Elena Diadenko's next class is October 7th at the Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art. Classes cost $60 and benefit veterans of the Ukraine war and displaced animals and pets. Find out how to reach her on our website. It's the U.S. versus Google in perhaps the most important antitrust case ever, or at least in recent years. The search engine giant was in court today for the beginning of a major antitrust case brought by the U.S. Justice Department. Government lawyers argue in opening statements that Google maintains its monopoly by paying more than $10 billion a year to companies like Apple and others to make Google the default browser on their smartphones. So what does this all mean for the company and the future of the internet? And joining us now to share their thoughts are Randall Picker, professor of law at the University of Chicago, where his interests include intellectual property, competition, and antitrust law, and Spencer Weber-Waller, director of the Institute for Consumer Antitrust Studies and professor in competition law at Loyola University Chicago School of Law. Thank you both for being here. So, Randall Picker, Department of Justice, state attorneys general on this case. What's at stake?
Well, Google is an incredible product. It's very successful. The question is, are they doing that legitimately? Not were they great originally, but are they still doing that in a legitimate way? Are they competing fairly now?
And Spencer Weber-Waller, what is the government's case that perhaps they're not?
So it's really two parts for any civil monopolization case like this. Not trying to put anybody in jail, not trying to fine them, trying to figure out whether or not Google has a monopoly over search or search advertising, and did they maintain this monopoly through unlawful, exclusionary, anti-competitive means, something other than honest competition.
And is the crux of the case here that billions of dollars in payments to the iPhone operators and the smartphone operators to make Google the default search engine, is that the dishonest means here?
I don't want to characterize that as dishonest, but that is what the government wants to argue, absolutely. I think it's important to appreciate that the contracts we're talking about go way back. So the first contract with Mozilla, Firefox, 2004, Apple, 2005, a world before the iPhone. And these contracts were put into place at a point where it wasn't clear what was going to happen, and those contracts have moved forward. Now they produce these results that are really quite dramatic.
And Spencer, do you think these contracts perhaps do prevent other search engines from coming in and competing?
Yeah, I'm probably in touch with my inner plaintiff a little more than Randy, but I think the point is contracts that have a legitimate purpose can have an illegitimate effect, and the size and scale and power of a Google can be reinforced in a way that prevents even better products from coming onto the market later on.
You kind of alluded to this, so what is Google's defense here?
Well, Google's defense is that they have negotiated these contracts with companies that have legitimate rights. There's an important question here about how people make browsers are going to make money. And the Microsoft case, which is the foundational case we start with, was exactly about the question of, could Microsoft somehow defeat Netscape Navigator? That market, which once you paid for software, no one pays for that software anymore. So Google wants to buy eyeballs effectively from Firefox and from Apple. Apple and Firefox should be able to sell those eyeballs like other media companies do.
And the fact that Google has 90% of this search engine market, is that alone a monopoly, I mean, technically?
That may make them a monopoly. It doesn't violate the law by itself. You have to show the monopoly power, and the government and the companies will fight about it. I think that's a relatively good case for the government. And then it comes down to what are the effects of these contracts. And it's very similar, as Randy was pointing out, to what happened in the Microsoft case, where a company that developed a good product, operating systems, maintained their monopoly through various exclusive contracts that prevented the next big thing from happening and taking them down a step.
And a lot of onlookers are saying that this case is going to determine perhaps a lot about the future of the internet. What is at stake for the future of the internet? Say Google wins its case.
You mean when the AI overlords come, what will they see in this case?
Sooner probably than we want to
I want to say, look, we seem to be at a next point, right? So the emergence of AI, ChatGPT and the like over the last year, I think it's very, very difficult to know what's going to happen to the internet next, how this case might shape that. So I don't think we should overreach here. We should decide this case. We should figure out what makes sense here. The internet will figure itself out going forward.
All right, so say the government proves its case that this is an illegal antitrust situation, then what happens to Google?
So if they win, they show the monopolization, they show the illegal activities, the court will issue an order holding that the company has to stop any of the contracts found to be illegal. Presumably, they will also do what's necessary and consider whether Google needs to divest, sell, license, or otherwise change the structure of the company. And hopefully we get a better result in Microsoft than in the Microsoft case, where that company was told to stop doing certain things, but it didn't make that much difference in the market, with one exception. It gave space for companies like Google to come in, and hopefully this remedy will allow the next great thing to come along.
So space like for other companies to come in, but go ahead.
What we may get is what life looks like in Europe right now. And what life looks like in Europe right now is that when you turn on your Android phone, the first time you want to use a search engine, you get a choice screen. And they say, which one do you want to use? Most people choose Google.
So do they outlaw those kinds of contracts in European countries?
There's been a version of this case that ran through Google, that ran through the European Union. And in that situation, Google lost, and this choice screen, which pops up the first time you turn on your phone, that was the remedy that was put in place. No one was broken up. right? They said
So maybe that's a remedy here. Is it better for the consumer to have that choice? Does it make a difference?
In general, yes. I don't know whether it'll make a difference, but competition law is about choice, and it is about a process of competition. It's not about an automatic outcome one way or another.
Agree with that completely.
All right. Well, you're agreeing on a couple things here,
Yeah.
disagreeing on some others. This is going to be a fascinating case to watch over the next several weeks. We thank you both for being here, Randall Picker and Spencer Weber-Waller. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that is our show for this Tuesday night. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. Now for Brandis Friedman and all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Perez Schutz. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm whose attorneys embrace a culture of philanthropy and service by volunteering their time, expertise, and guidance to help others in the greater Chicago community.